everything is sacred. Like anything that you do can be sacred or toxic, depending on how you do it. Look at sex. Sex can create life. It can take you to God. It can take you to portals. And it's also can be used for rape and pillage and war. It's the lightest light in the darkest dark right there. And in fact, the things that can take us to the highest levels of light have been demonized the most. A woman's body. Mm-hmm. Of course, they're going to call belly dancing, twerking, salsa, any kind of hip movement dirty and shameful because that's how the feminine is empowered. And of course, the patriarchal forces don't want that. They don't want us to be connected to our wombs and our root centers because that's our life force. So they're going to, look at historically, the colonizers would come to different parts of the world and take the spiritual practices, earth-based wisdom, and call them barbaric, and instead force their religion upon them for control. It was about politics. It was never about actually the belief of God. It has been used and coerced against us to make us afraid of ourselves. Welcome back to the Highest Self podcast. My name is Sahara Rose, and this podcast is all about taking spirituality and making it fun, modern, grounded, and relatable so it can actually serve the needs of today's people. I've been doing this podcast for over 7 years, and it's really grown and transformed as I have. It started as a place for myself to have the conversations that I deeply wanted to have. I felt like the spiritual space was very whitewashed. It was very focused on leaving the body and aliens and astral travel and hella expensive for most people. And I wanted to talk about earth wisdom and the divine feminine and embodiment and the things that really called me. So what began as me on my $15 microphone that I used for many, many years, just staring at the window, having conversations, getting on Zoom, talking to people over years has become this beautiful movement with people who listen to the podcast like yourself and lives that have been transformed, people who have had beautiful awakenings and experiences and connected with teachers that have supported them on the path and so much more. And really what this podcast stands for is a diverse, grounded, rich, feminine, sacred, earth-based wisdom view of spirituality that integrates the whole. So I am not alone in this movement. And actually, a few weeks ago, I had this idea that came through that said to me, wouldn't it be so cool if you had someone who listens to the podcast interview you? Because I learned so much about interviewing other people, and you never really get to hear me being interviewed on this podcast. So I did a little story, and then I shared it as a reel, and I shared who wants to interview me on the podcast, share with me what the conversation would be about, and then like the other ones that you would love to see. And this beautiful queen, Nina, commented, and I absolutely loved just instantly when I saw her energy, I was like, she is a full body yes to me. And then I felt like I recognized her from somewhere too, and I wasn't really sure from where. And I recognized that on 2019, when I first got on TikTok, we had followed each other then. So this is 4 years ago. And I remember loving her content then, and her brand has shifted. She had a totally different TikTok name, but just seeing her face, that it like stayed in my subconscious. So then when I saw it again, I was just like, she is the person. So you never know, full circle, by putting yourself out there, the ripple it might have even years down the line. So today she's going to be interviewing me on the podcast. I have no idea what she's going to ask me. We'll see where this conversation goes. We've just been listening to some pretty Ricky and Chingy, so we on a motherfucking vibe right now. And without further ado, let's welcome Nina to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited. And yes, that soul resonance from 4 years, lifetimes, whatever ago, just like, it's all a vibe. So I'm really happy to be here and to ask you some juicy questions. And I know this episode is probably going to be like a super fan favorite, because who doesn't want to interview you? Like, who doesn't want to ask the host the juicy questions? So
you better ask him then. I'm ready for it.
Okay, I hope you're ready. So I really want to start with just talking about your journey and talking about how you cultivated this life that you live out loud, like being in the media, living out loud, living in purpose, being in the spotlight, really, and doing that while maintaining like your spiritual practices, maintaining your integrity, maintaining your sense of self, your courage, your confidence. Like, what are the ways that you create your life as a ceremony?
You want me to give my life story, my ancestral story, my birth chart? Where are we taking this, baby? There's a lot.
I would say let's start with like, what was that moment in your life that initiated you onto this path? Like, what was that deep moment that you were like, I need to get on this path. I need to share this with other people. And it brought you to where you're at now.
For me, it wasn't one moment. It's a series of awakenings that unraveled day after day. And there were just periods of my life that were more around transformation and periods of my life that were more about acting on that transformation. And because we can have an awareness that something needs to shift, but then we don't do it, right? So I would say, the first maybe rendezvous that I had with this was when I was a very young child and I was spiritual and I would see spirits and I would, tell my brother, like, there's a ghost here. And I would talk about this all the time. And my parents were like, you're crazy, So as a child, I was very tuned into this. And then when I was in 4th grade, a bunch of kids threw me down a hill and I got a concussion because they said I was a witch and they needed to burn me at the stake. Wow. So that was my first realization that it is not safe for me to be magical. Then years later, I started practicing yoga and then getting very into raw veganism, which eventually led to my body becoming very malnourished, eventually losing my period for 2 years, having amenorrhea. And when you lose your period, your body goes into perimenopause. And I was 21 years old. So navigating those health challenges and then discovering Ayurveda was the next series of awakenings, which was really around my physical health, which I really think is where it all starts. Then healing my body through Ayurveda, desiring to share this wisdom with other people, but not knowing how I was ever going to write a book, make money out of it, my parents thinking I'm crazy, and all of the friction with my family and I, specifically this one fight with my dad where he disowned me, was the next initiation of it, of who am I outside of gaining the approval of my family. And then, of course, the process of writing my first book and second book and third book and, creating all of these things, which many initiations along there. Then my divorce, the most recent one, which was like really catalyzed me into deeper levels of embodiment and liberation that I was not allowing myself to fully access. So I would say that spirit in my lifetime has assigned me to certain obstacles that once I transmute them become what I share with other people. Right now, it's a lot around relationships and love and intimacy and things like that. And I know that my next book, potentially multiple, will be around this, but it's almost like I have to sit in the seat of the fire first, because it's like you're never really going to study something unless it's pertinent to you. So God is like, okay, we're going to give you some health problems so you can really dive in, some dharma problems so you can really dive in, now some love problems so you can really dive in. Here you go, bitch. Good luck.
I love that. So it's like embodiment. It's like being fully embodied in whatever it is you're teaching. And I think that's one of the things that I admire the most about you and your work, because like for me, it's the same thing, like being embodied in it. I don't want to teach something that I have not done for myself. It doesn't make sense to me, And you can feel when it's authentic, and you can feel that your path has been authentic and that you've transmuted a lot of things and it's still showing up as joy in your life. And I think that's what's so beautiful about your path and why so many people are drawn to you. I kind of want to go back though a little bit, because you talked about your dad and this thing that happened with you where he disowned you. And you recently went through this divorce. How has the divine masculine, how is that energy within you and without, like how has that shown up for you lately? Or what are you feeling around that now? Because I mean, that's a really, really deep wound, right? Like if your father disowns you, and I share that wound with you, so I understand. But for you specifically, like how has that, with the divorce that you just went through recently, how has that then played into your life, this divine masculine energy?
It has been my biggest work right now, because I have always been around women, very easy for me to have friends. My wounds have really never been around the feminine so much. But growing up, my dad was very strong and authoritative. So I always had a little bit of fear, but also really wanted his love and attention and validation. So that set me up as a child of how do I be the trophy daughter? How do I get good grades and be perfect and say the right thing and ask the right question which I think is why I podcast.
Yeah.
I learned my dad was very narcissistic. I learned how to be very interested in someone else's life. I learned I only have 5 minutes of his time right now until he goes to the office and closes the door. How do I get his attention and make it the most captivating as possible? Again, a lot of these things have turned into my gift. I think that's why I'm such a good speaker and why I'm able to connect with anyone and make them feel important. But it came from my trauma, which I believe my soul chose. And I actually, more recently sat in a medicine ceremony, and it absolutely showed me how it is all connected. But then, facing this divorce, it is very easy to go into the all men story. Mm-hmm. All men are this, all men are that. So I knew instantly this divorce could either cause me to close my heart or blast it wide the fuck open. And I'm going to choose. And I'm going to choose making this allow me to receive more love than I ever have before. And that's what has happened. Like before, if you told me what are your core values, I would be like truth, joy, this, but I wouldn't have said love.
Yeah.
It just wasn't on my mind. I didn't even identify as someone who had everyone's always talking about they have love problems. I was like, love is really easy for me because I was with him since I was 24 years old. So I never really I met him, we started dating, we actually had a very peaceful relationship. It was not toxic at all. We just really grew apart. So for me, I never identified as that. So I didn't do all the work around it. So then later on, now being 32 years old, I'm like, okay, what was I not looking at? But I went into, well, who are men that I do really trust? So I started a list on my phone of who are men that I really trust? And I recognized there are so many beautiful, heart-centered, open men around me. I'm just not in a relationship with them. But,
they're friend zone.
Yeah, but working on that one, no. But it showed me that just like if we had a bad encounter with a woman, we can't say all women. A bad encounter with a Black person, we can't say all Black people. A bad encounter with a Hispanic, a Persian, we can't say all. So it's so easy for us to create these generalizations that are not true. And now I'm so interested in the wounding of the masculine, because it actually really showed me how men are deeply hurting right now. Because the feminine, we support each other, we talk, we hold space, we listen. The masculine doesn't. They suffer alone and in silence. So it's actually made me a lot more compassionate and really just in my Kwandian energy of understanding, why men are carrying so much shame and suppression, and they're not certain about their roles in society. And what I desire in partnership is someone who has really dove into the depths of their own consciousness so I can worship them as an embodiment of the divine.
Ooh, you're preaching. You're preaching.
Yeah, because I think it's if you don't see God in that person, don't be with them. And because that's really what love and that's really what sex is. And having that awareness now of I worship the divine masculine doesn't mean every man I meet, but it means holding that frequency of knowing that there are men on this level. And the more that we can honor them and acknowledge them when they're there, the more they will rise up.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Everything you're saying totally resonates. And I think being on that tantric path that you're on, I've been on my own, and I had a relationship just like that where it was peaceful, right? There was nothing technically wrong, but we grew apart. And I think to people outside, they don't understand. And they're like, well, why? Everything was fine. You guys looked great together on the outside, and, you dressed well together, you looked well together, but what happened? And how do you explain that, right? Because that was something too that I was coming to terms with at that time. And this was years ago now, was how do I explain that my soul is bursting through my body and this person doesn't have the tools yet to be that container for me? I kind of want to pivot a little bit because you talked about love and your expansion of love in this new season. And it can be easy to focus on the things that went wrong and the divorce, but I kind of want to pivot to the love that you've been able to feel now for yourself and the way that you've been able to deepen your self-expression and your movement as medicine and how that's been healing for you through this process and every other thing that's going on in your life. But tell me a little bit more about how your relationship with movement has changed, because I know that you've always had one. And I think that's how we even connected, because movement for me is literally everything. But after this, how has that changed? How has that deepened? How has that evolved since all of this?
Yeah. So I feel I had put this veil upon myself of these expectations of, well, because I'm a wife, I can't show myself in this way. My in-laws are watching my Instagram. I don't want to make him jealous, or what will people think? Or like all of these things that we do upon ourselves when we carry this role all of a sudden. And because of that, like I would dance, but not like fully. And I still think I know there are deeper levels of expression within myself that I will be continuing to access for the rest of my life. So I feel when you experience a heartbreak, it's like this massive reset that happens, that it's like all of your beliefs come crumbling down, especially when it's a very big and traumatic one like mine was. So with that, I started to really ask myself, like, what do I want in this lifetime? Like, how do I want to show up? Like, and I realized how much of my mental energy went into what will people think? Self-imposed, I mean, because it's like, as a child, again, growing up Persian, it was very much around, don't dress like that. People will think this. Don't do this. Don't do that. Don't do that. So it's like, you don't even know what you think because it's all around the performance, the reputation, what they'll say about our family. And then also a lot of this good girl conditioning that I grew up with that, oh, well, men won't marry you if you dress up like that. They'll think you're a slut. You know, if you carry, and I remember like my cousin, she grew up in Iran and I was roommates with her in like high school and in college. And so we were friends with a lot of Arab people mostly. And there were so many rules around like, okay, always definitely never wear anything shorts. Like we would go to these clubs, but like you couldn't get alcohol from them. You always had to get it for yourself. You couldn't make eye contact. You couldn't this, you couldn't that. It was like all these rules that I grew up in the US, but I like learned through her because I was very interested in learning more about my Middle Eastern culture. But that really programmed me to be like, a man's role in your life is whether he's going to be your husband or not. So it's like, if he's going to be your husband, you need to show yourself as this like trophy wife. Again, like the trophy daughter, now you're the trophy wife. And if you don't, if you dress a little too this or are a little too flirty, God forbid, or something, you're going to be a hoe and you're never going to get married and your reputation is going to be ruined and game over for you, which, you know, in Middle Eastern culture back then was rooted in survival, right? If you don't have anyone marry you, you won't survive. So I was very fascinated how a lot of this conditioning was still living in me now, many years later. So I feel after this divorce, I mean, one of the first places I went was Trinidad Carnival, which I was planning to go to before that, but I think I played on a whole other level. I was just like, give me front line, baby girl.
Shout out to Trinidad. We love
wind up that body. Oh, wind up that body. And I was just so free. Like I've never felt the level of liberation that I felt in a motherfucking thong on that street behind that thing, like speakers everywhere. And everyone is just like, especially on Juve, which is the festival of colors, just throwing the colors in the mud, everyone just laughing and dancing and the sexuality is so playful there.
Yes.
It doesn't mean anything. There's no story around it. It doesn't mean we're going to get married and date and this. It's just like someone comes up, winds up behind you and then just leaves. There's no, you don't even need to talk. It just, you might smile, give each other a little high five and go on. And I was like, oh my God, like this is what I've been missing. And like, honestly, what I've wanted more than anything in my life is like a partner to dance with and something I've never had. Like none of my exes liked to dance ever. And it showed me like in Trinidad, I'm like, I will never be with someone who I can't dance with again because it's such a huge part of who I am. And to have that connection with someone where you're dancing together. And a huge realization I had was like dance for me growing up. I was a competitive dancer on like a hip hop team. I would perform at the Celtics halftime show. It was like, that was my whole childhood, right? But it was all about performance, all about it looking good for the other person. And that was a performative element to how I was showing up in relationship. Of it being the performance, the role of it, the role of the wife, the wedding, et cetera. And so now my practice of what I'm seeking to call in is more partner dancing, like kizomba dancing, bachata dancing, even salsa dancing. But I really am drawn to the ones that have less choreography, like kizomba, which is very much just in the movement, because then you're not dancing for someone, you're dancing with someone. You're being together, not being watched. And I think a lot of us with more feminine, we do have this like desire, look at me, watch me, which is like as a child, you know, you're like, hey, mom, look, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. Look at me. And it's like that little girl in us is still often activated, but it's like, do you want someone to watch you or do you want someone who's right there with you? And I think having a partner who can dance with you will just to such a greater level, increase your polarity, increase your nonverbal conversation, and it gives you a practice that you do that builds together. So I'm so grateful for all of this because one day I'll have someone to dance with.
Yes.
I'm never gonna dance again. Guilty feet have got no rhythm.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that you said so many things that I want to touch on. So first of all, like I said, I'm Jamaican, so Carnival is a big part of our culture too. And, you know, like that being what I grew up with and knowing that it's not inherently like dirty or anything like that, what a lot of other cultures see it as, I feel like that was so freeing for me as a young child. And being like an adult now and coming into the space of just awareness of our own sensuality and sexuality as women and divine feminine beings, it's just been so beautiful to watch like cultures be embraced, because there are things that I love about Arab cultures and there are things I love about my culture and American culture and all of that. So I love that you got to experience that. Shout out to our Trinidadians, like I said, but that just warms my heart. Like that makes me really, really, really happy. So we're going to have to go to Carnival together at some point.
Okay, wind up the buddy. Wind up the buddy. Yes, it is like, to me, like people are like, Burning Man. I'm like, no, Carnival.
No, right.
That's where it's at. I wanted to go to the Jamaica one. No one would go with me. So let's go. I'm like, I want to go to the Notting Hill one. All of them. It is the most joyful thing I've ever experienced.
Yes, yeah, so much embodied joy. And I love when you talked about like the partner dancing and that partner being with you. And the word that came up for me was like experiencing you and experiencing this with you rather than just observing you perform. And it takes both people out of their head. You know, it's both people are able to do that dance and be embodied, and just the polarity is insane. It's insane. So I personally love salsa. It's so much fun. All right. So let's go into a little bit of adornment. Let's go into that because one, you look beautiful today. In your orange is very much sacral. What has this tantric path taught you? What has that taught you?
I feel like stage one of feminine adornment is, what do I dress to look good for men? You know, it's how do I wear, like, remember back in like college, it was like the tight little like high-waisted skirt with like the loose top and the long necklace. It was like a freaking like uniform we all had on, and you know, different trends and different times. And then you go into the stage two of the spiritual journey, which is like, I don't care about my looks at all. Like, I'm only going to wear white, loose clothes. I'm not going to wear makeup because I'm not my looks. And it's important, I think, to release ourselves from this expectation of like, my looks are everything, to it's not about my looks, it's about my soul. But then I feel like there's this stage three, which is like the feminine integration of beauty is a spiritual path. And beauty has always been the pathway of the goddess. You know, in any culture you go to, the way that the goddess is looked at is with such sacred reverence. She's bedazzled in gold and sequins and gemstones and crystals. And she has her flowing long hair and her sacred tools, whether it's beautiful fans or a sword or whatever else. And every single one of her, it's like we can see through the art of adornment, she's really representing her energy and what she stands for. And this doesn't mean, oh, she's materialistic in any way. It's like, I mean, go to Thailand, go to India, look at the amount of gold in these temples, because that is how we give back to the beauty that is the divine, that is God. So I started to, you know, and it was a gradual thing. I totally went through my all white stage. I mean, if you go back to this podcast, my first photo shoot was all white. I mean, I always still glammed it up a little bit because beauty is a very big part of Persian culture. Like it's very about like dressing well and beauty in your home. But I had to go through that stage. Now for me, I love fashion as a way of expression. Like I go through different moods in my life, different time periods. Like I had my little dark goddess phase, so I was doing a lot of all black. Now I'm in my neon Afro beats because I'm going to Afro Nation. I went to the one last month. I'm going to the other one. I DJ a lot of Afro beats music. So I'm in my like very inspired by those prints there. So I love like allowing my outer reflection to embody my inner reflection, because of course I don't need it. My voice, my tone, my aura, these things are all sharing who I am. But I love to add on that layer because it gives even me an extra sensory feedback of like, now I'm wearing this orange shiny jumpsuit. Like I'm in an orange shiny jumpsuit mode, you know?
Yeah.
I played Pretty Ricky and Chingy before this. You know, I had to get up in that vibe. If I was wearing a beautiful silk dress, I would have maybe played some Sabrina Claudio and been on that vibe. So I feel like all of these art forms really are a way for us to play with energy and express and share it with other people and then get inspired by them. And like, I get inspired, like I'll see, oh, someone wore this. And I'm like, for example, I'm very into seashells. So and seashells are huge. I also found out my great-grandma was from Ethiopia. And so in a lot of Ethiopian culture, there's lots of seashells. So I always love looking at new ways to incorporate that, like a little headpiece, earrings, a bralette. So sometimes I find, and then of course in Carnival, I didn't even choose my costume. Which one did I get assigned to? The seashell one. It's like, so even Source speaks to us back in art. And it's always been a part of the spiritual pathway.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Source speaks to us back in art and that embodiment and that expression of what you're feeling. And I feel like that's such a beautiful way of honoring the divine feminine is whatever it is that's going on for you that day, that season, allowing yourself to honor it in all ways, including what you show up as in the world and how you look, and that being a direct reflection of the energy of whatever goddess it might be that you were working with, or that you may not even know you're working with, but you are, or embodying. So like right now, like you said, you're in this very like Afro beats. Like I could tell looking at you, like I would just think Chingy. Like I was just thinking like 90s. I would just think,
I appreciate that. Thank you. I've always wanted to look like Chingy.
yes. Shout out to Chingy.
Every time you try to leave, something keeps pulling me back, telling me I need you in my life.
That was so on point. I love it.
That was great. Great harmonization.
And yeah, I love that. And like, I've been feeling very much, and when you mentioned Kuan Yin, very much in my Kuan Yin lately, right? And very much in that like compassion energy. And it's so beautiful how we go through these phases and seasons. And you mentioned a few things that made me think about intuition. And a lot of people ask this question. I know you get this all the time. I'm pretty sure I've gotten it a lot too, is how do you learn to honor the divine feminine? How do you learn to honor your intuition even deeper than you ever have before? Because there are levels to it, right? Where 10 years ago, you were honoring it in a totally different way. But now where you're at in your life, it's a totally different ballgame. So what does that look like for you today? How do you honor your intuition, whether it comes to how you dress, how you dance, how you move, how you speak? How are you honoring the divine feminine?
The biggest thing for me is giving myself space and patience, because I'm a very quick person, right? And because of that, I can be like, okay, what am I supposed to do? And I want the answer really quick. And I know when I'm coming from that space of trying to be like, what do I do? And then I go into my analyzation and my pro and con list and writing it down. And the moment I go into voice noting all my friends about what to do, I know I've already lost it, you know? And it's hard because especially as women, we have been taught that a form of bonding is bringing our questions to the table. And I do think there is a time and space for that, but ultimately the answer must come within you, because no friend will know the total answer. They don't know everything going on in any situation. They don't know how you really feel. They don't know your past lives and your karma. Oh, it's only you. So I found for myself, giving myself that container and that space of waiting for the pause. And in that pause of really sitting with something, my voice of clarity comes through. So some of the tools that have supported me. So right after I went through my divorce, cold plunging was a really big thing for me, which I never was into before. I was always like, cold, hell no. And also in Ayurveda, it's very like anti-cold. So I was trained like never have the woman's body be cold. The woman's body must always be warm, oiled, nurtured. So I was very kind of like, that's more masculine. However, the medicine that I was needing in that initial stage was that I can overcome painful things and that this too shall pass. And it's just sensation. So that was like my practice because I was in a very painful space in my life. But then I didn't need that medicine anymore. And then actually in Trinidad, the medicine of Santa Maria, of marijuana came in. And I was never a weed smoker in my life before. The times I tried it would make me very anxious, but it came in. It was Rasta culture there. So it was like really where it comes from. And that really gave me very deep meditations to sit with things that like I wouldn't have probably thought about as fully without that medicine. So I'm very deeply grateful for cannabis because of the way that it allows you to just sit with something long enough to find your own realization for it. And then after a while, that tool just I'm just not drawn to it anymore as much. I think there's beauty to it. It's not calling to me right now. And then more recently, a few months ago, 2 months ago, my friend introduced me to Hape, which we spoke about, which is a South American sacred tobacco. And the first time that I sat with it, I felt all of this tension in my shoulders just dissolve, and I meditated for like an hour. And every time I sit with it, for me, it really drops me into very deep meditations. And from these meditations, I'm able to feel into the truth of how I feel. And that has been the current medicine that has been resonating with me. So I find these tools can serve us, and ultimately, it's not about what the plant is telling you. It's about you sitting with yourself long enough, and that plant is supporting that. Now, before we get started on my embodiment journey and how I got to this expression, I want to share with you a tool that I have developed that can help anyone get to their unique expression. Because I meet a lot of people with powerful stories who just don't know how to deliver it. They don't feel confident as speakers. They're in their heads. They stumble. They feel like they lose people when they're telling a story. And the thing is, these are all things that are preventable. We can learn how to become more riveting storytellers. And I've actually put together everything I've learned through over 7 years of doing this podcast, 500 plus episodes, in my revolutionary method called Speak with Soul. So in just 21 days, 10 minutes a day, I teach you everything you need to know, from how to decide what type of speaker you want to be, the tone, texture, and quality of your voice, how to build a story arc. And then at the end, you actually record your podcast intro. So if you could see yourself creating a podcast like this one day, speaking on stages, sharing your message with the world, this course is for you. So if you're interested or you want to check out the incredible success stories from people who have gone through this journey, head over to speakwithsoulcourse.com. Again, that's speakwithsoulcourse.com, and you can find that link in the show notes. I'm so excited to hopefully have you interview me on this podcast one day.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful way to talk about plant medicine. It's been a huge part of my journey as well. And Hape is one of my favorite plant medicines of all time. And it really does bring you into this like really grounded space in your body where you're not operating in the mental anymore. And I feel like for someone like me who's very Vata, and I think you might have some of that too, is we can be quick, like you said, and fast and want things to just kind of come. It's very, very airy, very light, and allowing ourselves to just sit and be for that long. It's a beautiful, beautiful supportive practice. So my question for you when it comes to cannabis, I know there's a lot of stigma around it. And even though it's being destigmatized now, there is a lot of stigma around it now. Even within the spiritual community, there's tons of stigma around it. How did you, being in the public eye, how did you face that? Did you have any backlash? Did you have anyone kind of judging you for it or anything like that?
I don't know. They didn't tell me. No, I mean, I didn't make a public declaration like, guys, I'm starting to smoke now. Like or dislike, I didn't. I think sometimes we think we need approval from other people. We don't. It showed up in my field, and I started to sit with it, and it really supported me. And, and I would say the internal shame probably came from myself, because I realized I had carried this shame around how I viewed, we say these words, someone's a pothead. It's like a negative thing. Or if I saw people smoked a lot, I'm like, they're escapists. And it was just very much not my path before, right? But then I started to realize there is such beauty to it. Now, again, you can take any medicine and use it in a really medicinal way, or you can use it as escapism. It really depends on your intention. It depends on the state of consciousness that you are at. For me, it's not something I would ever do publicly at parties, at events. It's a meditative tool for me. But, the last time I even tried it, I just was too in my head actually about it, that it was no longer serving me anymore. And I feel like my relationship right now is kind of done with it at this point. Maybe we'll come back and maybe it won't. So I just feel like these tools come into our lives as certain teachers. Another plant medicine for me was ayahuasca. It was something that I was deeply scared of, actually. And had my own judgment around because I would, I think when we're afraid of something, we find the extreme examples of it. So I'd be like, all these people are just doing ayahuasca every weekend. Their lives aren't changing. They're spiritual bypassing. I don't need it. Everything we need is here in our reality. It's all true. That does exist. Everything is here in our reality. And I had done so much healing work on myself. And then having done that ceremony, I'm so grateful I had done that work because it took me to just deeper levels of it. And it showed me connections that I just wouldn't have probably seen or would have taken me longer to see. I can see why someone after an experience like that would be like, what else do I not know? I need to do another ceremony. I need to do another ceremony. But that's why the integration is actually even more important than the ceremony. And I believe these things take months, really months, to probably the whole year. You're still continuing to integrate it because it's in your field and it's in your frequency that, I feel very complete with that. I'm sure at some point in my life it will come back. But I was even very clear around the only way that I would sit with ayahuasca is if it was a circle of all Persian women, because I wanted to go into the ancestral trauma in my family of forced child marriage, which has been passed on intergenerationally. And of course, I end up in a ceremony with the facilitator being a Persian woman and 2 other Persian women.
Wow.
And like one random British girl. It's just like, probably realized like, where am I? We're like, oh, you're the colonizer here. Welcome. Yeah. Like we're going to replay our family constellations here. No. But it was so, and we had so many other, I believe these medicines actually work to put you together with the right people to be mirrors for each other because, we all mirrored each other in like different ways, like light and shadow. And I believe that these medicines, if we really listen and tune to them, they will call us when we're ready for it, show us those things. But it's not meant to be a crutch. It's meant to be something, it's medicine, right? You take it as medicine and then you go on and you live your life. So after doing that medicine, I felt like very complete with really focusing so much of my attention on like the healing and the this and the that of just like, I just want to live my life, and being in joy, being in pleasure, being in light, being in community and relationship. These things are ultimate healers, and that's what it's there for. So it actually, the opposite thing happened to me of like, I didn't become addicted to the healing, but I actually was like, thank God for the healing because it allows us to live more fully.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that. The fully embodied version of you that came through after that, because it does happen quite a bit that it'll be a crutch for people. And like you said, you can use anything. I mean, food is medicine, but you can also use food as a crutch when you emotionally eat. So it all has a place to play. And, for me, ayahuasca was very healing and it was beautiful, but it was the same as you. I was like, I'm good. Like I've got what I needed, and it helped me to ground even deeper into who I am. And I didn't feel like I would probably sit with it ever again. And if it happens and it calls me, wonderful. But it literally called me for years before I sat with it. So with that, and bringing in that intuition conversation, for people that are struggling right now with their intuition, what is the one tip that you could give them that would help them to just drop in?
So for me, it's my embodiment practice. So the first thing that I do in the morning is I just play a song. Often I just go to my liked on Spotify and I'm like, Spirit, play me the song that's like the vibration of the day. So it's a little oracle moment. And I will even just in bed be like rolling my shoulders and my back and my neck. And sometimes it's like self-touch of touching my arms and my face. And it's very sensuous. Other times it's more like dancing and like moving. Sometimes it's more stretching, but just having one song before getting on your phone, before even doing like the breath work and the meditation stuff, just one song to let your body move. Just once, if you just do that, I promise you the voice of your intuition will become so much louder. And it feels so good. And then from that place, because our intuition has different octaves and frequencies too. I mean, and there's a difference between the voice of your anxiety and fear and your intuition, which is often we're listening to the anxiety and fear and we think it's our intuition. Yeah, so I think a lot of us are listening to the voice of our fear and anxiety and thinking that it's intuition. So coming back to your body, another thing is just taking a walk. I find just taking a walk really balances the left and right hemispheres of your brain when you're stepping with your right leg, left leg, right leg, left leg. And that to me, just the first few minutes of my walk is like I'm very in my head. I'm kind of clearing out the debris. And then afterwards, I start to see more clearly. So taking a walk, stretching, being in nature, just taking some space away from the problem that you're trying to solve and doing something that's like completely different creates that, again, frequency that we step into, that all of a sudden we're on a higher level of this elevator and we can see perspectives that we wouldn't have seen before.
Yeah, I love that. It's, again, getting just into your beingness and not in your head so much. And walking meditations, honestly, are probably one of my favorite ways to meditate. It's so simple. And like you said, it balances out the hemispheres of your brain. But it's beautiful to just be out getting air, looking at trees, maybe even touching a tree, hugging a tree, just hearing the birds, seeing even the colors, right, in the sky. Like that changes so much, like color therapy and using that because they all have their own vibration, just like the orange you're wearing. It's all beautiful and it all plays a part. Oh, man. So I have a phrase that's been coming to me lately, and I want to hear your take on it. It is 100% human, yet 100% divine. And it's a take on Mother Mary. It's actually a card in a deck that has that on it. And I sat with that for a while, and I really thought about the path of joy, the path of expression, and how to some it may seem like that's not spiritual. It's like, well, how could that be? That seems so earthly based, like having fun, dancing, twerking, all of these things, beauty, embodiment, makeup, all those things. It could seem like it's not spiritual. What for you would you say to someone that wants to get on a journey like that, right? And that's interested in those things, but maybe feels some inner judgment about it, or maybe outer judgment about it. Somebody that sees you and is like, I want to get on a path like that. I feel that. I resonate with her. But how can I do that? Like, where do I start? What do I do?
Well, first of all, everything is sacred. Like anything that you do can be sacred or toxic, depending on how you do it. Look at sex. Sex can create life. It can take you to God. It can take you to portals. And it's also can be used for rape and pillage and war. It's the lightest light in the darkest dark right there. And in fact, the things that can take us to the highest levels of light have been demonized the most. A woman's body. Mm-hmm. Of course, they're going to call belly dancing, twerking, salsa, any kind of hip movement dirty and shameful because that's how the feminine is empowered. And of course, the patriarchal forces don't want that. They don't want us to be connected to our wombs and our root centers because that's our life force. So they're going to, look at historically, the colonizers would come to different parts of the world and take the spiritual practices, earth-based wisdom, and call them barbaric, and instead force their religion upon them for control. It was about politics. It was never about actually the belief of God. It has been used and coerced against us to make us afraid of ourselves. So when you see that this is actually a systemic issue, and a lot of the reasons why we carry this judgment is used for us to be gaslit by ourselves and our own intuition. And there are systems that benefit from this because if you're confused around, oh my God, is my body shameful or is it holy? No, it should be shameful. Of course, I'm not going to listen to my body. If I don't listen to my body, I'm going to listen to the priest, the mayor, the president, the whoever the fuck. Because then I have no internal compass. So this is like a major gaslight programming that has been happening for many generations now that we are now remembering back into. And this is why it's so important to go back to the earth-based wisdom, which by the way existed in all parts of the world, including Europe. We often still just see it intact in indigenous cultures because they were in the Amazon and in jungles that they were not pillaged as much. They were still able to hide in these sanctuaries from these different colonizers. So it's still intact, like the Yawanaw and all these different tribes. However, Europe was actually just the first. There are many pagan, Celtic cultures, Slavic culture. The word shaman is actually an ancient Russian word. So oftentimes people think, oh, well, my family's just been like Catholic. I don't have an indigenous. We're all indigenous to earth. Every single culture worshipped the elements. And every single culture looked at the seasons and the cycles, the stars, the herbs, the plants, and found medicine in all of those things. So when we can go back to the natural ways that we have all always been as human, of course we have a hard time with our intuition. We're not in our natural habitats. We're not listening to the stars. We don't even see the stars anymore.
No.
We're fed food that is like homogenized. I'm actually shocked we're doing as well as we are.
Honestly. Honestly.
Like kudos to us.
Yeah.
Like you go to Hawaii for like 2 days and all of a sudden you're like sleeping at 7 p.m. because you're like, I didn't see bright lights everywhere at night.
Yeah.
And so shows us how quickly our bodies want to come back into balance if we just give them a chance.
Yeah. So I loved everything that you shared, and it really brought something up for me. It's a phrase that's been coming through, and it's about activating your holy fire. Within all women, there is fire, right? We have this fire in our belly. Our wombs are this creation portal, and it's been suppressed for so long. And as women, how can we begin to activate that fire and use it and channel it so that we can do good on this earth, and that we can wake up and our wombs can be empowered and we can feel really, really just feminine and divine?
This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Do you ever feel off, like you have certain days or even weeks where, I don't know, you're just not feeling like yourself, and maybe you use your coping mechanisms, you go on social media, you scroll through a bunch of memes, but the underlying issue doesn't go away. And that's because therapy is needed to get to the root cause of it. So I highly recommend anyone going to therapy. It's a wonderful addition to your spiritual practice because it helps you really get to whatever traumas or limiting beliefs or suppressed memories that you may be holding on to that are preventing you from living the Dharma, the soul purpose that you are here to live. So I've teamed up with BetterHelp, which is an incredible therapy company that offers convenient, flexible, affordable, and entirely online therapy. You just fill out a brief questionnaire, you get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch them at any time with no additional charge. So if you want to live a more empowered life, head over to betterhelp.com/Sahara to get 10% off your first month. Again, that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/SAHARA. You can find that link in the show notes. I mean, it starts with tuning into our own womb spaces and dropping the guilt, dropping the shame, dropping the conditioning that this part of us is wrong or this part of us exists merely to satisfy another person. A lot of us don't actually feel like we own our vaginas. We're afraid of the word, you know, you can say vagina, you can say pussy, you can say yoni, whatever you want to call it. We need to be more comfortable with just speaking about it, first of all. Speaking about it, feeling into it. I mean, my podcast has basically just become a sexuality podcast at this point because I just share what I'm working with and what I'm interested in. And I feel like the sexuality wound is the biggest wound in our time.
Yes, absolutely.
Again, we can go so many different ways with it, but it's just starting with our own relationship with our womb. Because our womb is the earth and it's the mother and it's our reflection with nature. It's our reflection with the feminine. It's our reflection of all of these things. So really just starting there and, you know, having your own, maybe a yoni mapping practice, a self-pleasure practice, yoni steaming, even just hip circles, tuning into like I love when I'm just sitting, I just do hip circles and I just start feeling, I bring my energy and my focus down there. Shaking, just like literally shimmying and shaking your body. I love having a standing desk. I always say I work and twerk. So I'm like standing and I'm like doing my little twerk right there.
Work and twerk.
Yeah.
I love it.
Even the word twerk, which comes from the Nola Bouncing, the origin of the word is to work. And so they'd be like work. And even that, which has origins from different styles of African dancing. I mean, every single dance form has a hip movement to it, you know, hula dancing, Tahitian dancing, different forms of belly dancing, salsa, bachata. I mean, the list goes on. And then a lot of the styles of dancing that we see now used to have hips, but it was taken out. So a lot of the traditional temple dancing used to have a lot more of the hips, but then with the modern patriarchal view of religion, it was taken out because it was seen as shameful. So I would be curious what this world looked like before this programming.
Yeah.
You know, there's so many interesting stories of like, you know, the British went to these different islands in like Papua New Guinea and the women had their breasts out and they were like, oh my God, this is disgusting and shameful. She must cover. So the woman took the next day they came back and they had their breasts covered, but they took off their bottoms. And the guys were like, what? All these women's vaginas are out. But to them, they were like, but you said you didn't like our breasts. Like they didn't have shame around their body. What would this earth look like if we didn't have shame around parts of our bodies? Like 2 weeks ago when I had my highest self weekend, the day after, my friend Mia Magic and I, we went into this beautiful like Austin, like nature. It was like this river and like no one was there. And so we were like sitting and meditating and we took our tops off to be in nature, but there was someone like really, really far away. And I felt instantly my fear programming of like, what if they see me with my shirt off? Like, oh my God, like I won't be safe.
Yeah.
And it was like, even the thought of someone from like a mile away, maybe seeing my fucking nipple sent me into this fear response of I won't be safe. That's how deep this wound runs. Because for so long, women have been like, if I show my body, I might arouse a man and get raped. And that fear is living in us. So it's like, let's stop blaming. It's not your fault that you're afraid of being sensual. It's not your fault that you're afraid of self-pleasure. It's not your fault. It hasn't been safe for the feminine. So this rage makes sense. You know, it makes sense that we're angry. We could even be angrier. Yeah. There's a lot more anger that we could tap into. I think we're deeply afraid of our anger because society says an angry woman, stay away from her. You know, we have all these stigma. What do they say? Angry Black woman, you know, to clear away women from stepping into their power. Oh, you can be a sexy Black woman. You can't be an angry Black woman. Angry woman, she's a haggard, she's a witch, she's a this, she's a that. We actually get to channel our sacred anger and propel it towards change. However, if we just sit with this anger and let it just eat away our bodies, it will make us sick. And that's why there's so much autoimmune disease. It's literally our bodies fighting against themselves. You don't need to hold on to all of this anger deep within yourself. That's a huge thing that these medicines have brought on me, this like deep sacred anger that's like grandmother's deep. For all of the abuse that has happened in my lineage, for all the ways the womb has been abandoned and used as a commodity. And, you know, it runs deep. So we can't bypass it. Sometimes it's easy for me, I know, to go into my Kuan Yin of like, it's all sacred and it's all good. And it's like, sometimes my work is I need to go into my Kali and let that anger be felt, but not doing it in a way that it's like pointed at someone. It's not that man's fault. It's not any one person's fault. Yeah. It's a collective rage. It's a collective anger. So for me, what that looks like is, you know, if I go into my rage practice, I will punch my pillows. I will scream into them. I will, especially in my car, I could get to be super loud in there. I'll play like Tribe Called Red. I'll go into like my rage practice. And the thing is, like, it never lasts more than like few minutes, you know, like after you're just like, you're good. Like, and then you're just, you feel so light and free from a genuine space, not like when you're anxious all day and like something's off. Like if you just let yourself have like 3 minutes of rage, you would have just felt so much better for the rest of your day. And I always say the angriest people are the ones who never really felt their anger. Right? Because they're the ones who are always like snapping at people. It's like this little teapot that wants to like come out, a little simmer, a little simmer, a little steam, a little steam. Instead, just let the fucking pot, let all the steam out. Don't point it at anyone, but let it out. And then you're released from it and you don't have to hold on to it any longer.
Oh, that's such a beautiful analogy, the teapot. It feels like it's just bubbling under the surface, this anger. And it does come out in micro things, microaggressions. And if you're aware enough, you can catch yourself doing those things and then realize that, okay, I need to be doing more of my sacred rage practice or something like that. So developing your intuition to be able to do that, I think is something that the listeners can take from this as well, is if you do find that you're easily irritated, maybe it's a time where you can go into your sacred rage practice, or you can do some self-pleasure, whatever it is that works for you. But having those practices in your tool belt, I think, is like a huge part of all of this, of the feminine just reclaiming what is ours. And it's okay to be angry. I think that's one of the things for women that we don't feel. We don't feel that it's okay to be angry. We think that it's wrong. And then there's this like, this fight within us. And I think that's where the autoimmune comes in. Those diseases come in. Have you had any bouts with any health things, speaking of autoimmune, that maybe you haven't shared yet or you feel comfortable sharing that may help someone?
Since I was 21, I healed that. I honestly have barely even gotten a cold.
Yeah. And
I mean, I did get parasites in Bali. But that was a blessing because it caused me to go into this like deep parasite cleanse and stuff, but I never get sick. And I that used to not, I mean, I have always had a great immune system, I think, because I would travel a lot as a child. So I'd be exposed to different bacteria and that really helped. But yeah, once I started to really attune to my body, and, you know, I'm grateful that I went through those health challenges earlier in my life, because now I can feel if my vata is off or my pitta is off and stuff very quickly, that I don't go through those health challenges. I will say, just coming back to the anger piece, you know, a lot of this work has been my healing work through, you know, going through my divorce. And even before that, there was just a lot in my lineage around the abuse of the patriarchy. And that's what led me to creating my embodiment certification and this triple E embodied method, which is emote, embody, and express. And this is exactly what healed me in my darkest hour of emote, feeling the feeling, you know, feeling the rage, the anger, the sadness, the grief, the longing. We must feel and purify those things from our being, but you're not going to be able to just do a joy practice when you're like really fucking angry. Yeah. It's like, you got to just give it its microphone, give it center stage, let it talk its talk. And then from there, embody, you know, and also in the practice, I say, where do you feel it in your body? What color is it? What texture is it? Is it moving? Talk to it. Let's take it out of your body. What story does it have for you? And then from there, bring into your body the sensation that you do desire. If it's more flow, how can I move my shoulders and my neck? If it's more peace, how can I embody more peace, embody more surrender? And then actually expressing that out into the world, whether it is through dance, poetry. Improv has been a huge practice of mine. I do like shadow work improv that I teach my students, of like acting out the different shadows within you. Yeah. And to me, this threefold method has been the greatest game changer for myself. And I see my students who've had lifelong traumas that have analyzed in their heads for years, right? And then when they emote, embody, express, it's gone. And this is actually the work that out of everything I've done, I'm the proudest of, because I have seen miracles happen. Like in one session, people resolve like lifelong trauma from sexual abuse that has happened, you know, really heavy things, or just like crippling anxiety or whatever else the thing is. And it's so beautiful because I feel I'm at this place because I have really gone into the depths of my soul that I can trust that source will let you feel what you need to feel. And I'm not responsible for telling you what to say or what to do or for even healing you at all. All I can do is hold the container of safety for you to go through your process yourself. And when we let our bodies just guide us to emote, to sound, to express, to move in the ways that they want to move, it's like they rewire themselves and reorient themselves. And it's like all of a sudden you're like doing this weird like neck twitch thing, and it's like, boo, and that thing is gone and it's out of your being. It's like when you see an animal and it's like doing some weird movement and then it's like the nervous system resets that way. We have stopped doing that because, again, we have become so hand sanitized in our society, and we're like rigid and we're in our desks. And even when we're by ourselves, we don't want to be like weird, right? We have such a thing. Like even sometimes when I'm doing something weird, I'm like, if someone walked into my room right now, like, what would they think about what I'm doing? I'm like, why am I thinking about that? Because even when we're alone, it's like I witnessed how the mind is perceiving itself. And I think a lot of that is from social media as well, of like, we're almost like on all the time, even when we're not on, because we're so used to being watched and performing. So from witnessing that, it's like, so what are the feelings and the sensations that we're not allowing ourselves to experience because of the self-judgment? And those very things are probably the things that would create the greatest breakthrough in your life.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my God, that's so beautiful. I want to just move into one last thing. Where are you headed now? Like, what's next for you? Because you've done all this amazing work. You have your students, you have your academy, you have all of these wonderful things going. You're in this new phase in your life. Like, what's next? Like, what's the next level for Sahara?
Honestly, it's music for me, because that is the thing that makes me just come alive. Like when I am listening to music, I'm just hearing it at such a deeper level that I actually received the download that in the future, I'm actually not going to write books. I'm going to create albums, and those albums are going to be around the message. So an album on surrender or sacred sensuality or whatever it is. And the album is going to be the transmission, because when I read a book and I'm reading that word, I'm actually reading it from my perspective and my point of view. There's zero embodiment in that whatsoever. On top of that, writing a book, you have to write that thing 3 years before it actually comes out. It's like a year of writing it, a year of editing, and then a whole year it's just on the shelf before it comes out. Plus how many years it takes that person to read it. It's like, you're just such a different person by then. And I'm changing all the time. And the process of writing a book is very masculine. I'm good at writing books. I've written like 5 of them now, but I don't feel called to it anymore. I feel called to creating transmissions through frequency, which is, I believe, where our society is heading in general. So diving deeper into my production abilities to be able to actually produce these transmissions and take different samples of global beats. I want to make Persian pork music.
Yes, I'm here for that.
Yes, and I'm very inspired by dance hall. Like dance hall was like, growing up, my friends were all like Jamaican, Antiguan, Bajan. So I've been very inspired by Caribbean culture. Afro beats, all of those things. So I want to learn more about production. I want to continue DJing. So I started DJing at festivals like now almost 2 years ago. And now just this summer, I'm DJing in Estonia and Mykonos and
so awesome.
Quebec and like all these places now. So I want to, but it's hard because I love like 2000s hip hop and all of that, but the lyrics are not great. Like, yeah, like some of them are quite empowering. Like I think My Neck, My Back, I'm like, you girl, you claim what you want in life. I like that. But then other ones aren't.
Yeah.
Right? So that's why I do want to learn how to produce music so I can create music that has that same like synergy into it without it's like lyrics that I would want into my consciousness. And more spoken word as well. Like I've always loved poetry, and this year I've been doing a lot more spoken word pieces and doing visual art with it. So I feel my artist archetype is just, and before I felt like, well, growing up in an immigrant family, it's like an artist, like you're going to be starving and homeless, like good luck. Like it was never even a possibility.
Yeah.
So I feel like my soul's journey, I needed to learn how to be in my teacher, my visionary, my entrepreneur, channel my masculine energy to provide myself the safety, the financial stability. So now I'm able to create art and not have to worry about monetizing it so much, but be able to create art for art's sake, which is such a gift, because I see a lot of artists struggle because they have to kind of sell themselves out for what's selling and what's making money. So then they lose that artistic clarity and that transmission that they're really here to share. So that, and another major realization, I guess I'll share it here on this podcast. I shared it at my Highest Self weekend. I love events. Like I am such a community person. I'm an in-person person. I want to feel you. I want to talk to you. I do these podcasts for like 7 hours in a day, and I'm just like, then I go home and I go to another event. I love talking. So I love being with people, and I love music festivals. So something that's been coming into my field, and then I declared it, is I want to create my own music festival.
Oh my gosh, that's going to be epic.
With tribal dancing, Bhangra dancers and drummers, belly dancers, Trini, Jamaican, like every culture from around the world, with like gatherings and ceremony and ritual and magic, but like joyful and heart-centered and like in nature. So I was like, where is this festival going to be? And then God kept guiding me, Portugal.
Oh my gosh.
So I feel like because on Sunday I'm leaving for Portugal, and I'm going to see what happens. I literally have no plan. I'm just like, I'm just going to go there and see. And I feel that spirit. And I'm going to first Afro Nation Festival and then from there traveling. But I feel, which I don't know, by the time this podcast comes out, it will be like deep in the summer. So maybe I'll have more clarity by then. But I feel like it might be in Portugal because that is such a cross grounds right now. It's very close to, Africa and the Middle East and Europe and the United States. It's very open. It has very I want to also bring like the romance frequency back in. Like that has been a huge thing. The beauty path has been huge for me as well. So I feel I will create a music festival that really embodies all of these qualities in a lived experience. And actually what's coming through now is that it might become a village that people live in all the time.
Oh my gosh.
So we'll see. We might just create our own county.
You guys heard it here first on this episode of the podcast. There's going to be a village.
Lemuria's coming back.
You're all invited.
Welcome.
That's amazing. I could totally see just a bunch of women, just like divine feminine energy, the beauty, the art, just like creating from a place of joy and not survival, a place of peace and not lack. Like that makes such a difference. Like when you were speaking about music, like I'm so aligned with that and I love that. I feel like I'm on a similar path too of just like really wanting to express all of these things musically. And music has its own vibration, you know, and sound has its vibration. And it's such a potent way to just get into that subconscious. And our bodies respond so well to sound. Like even the sound of our breath, right? Like to sound in general, it's so beautiful. So I'm here for it. I want to be a part of it. Whenever it happens, I want to be a part of it. That sounds amazing, amazing, amazing. So I think we are done. I think we've gotten everything out. Is there anything else that you have coming up right now that we should know about that's kind of on the forefront, maybe for the summer?
Yeah. So, well, I'll announce it now. By the time this episode comes out, it'll be out. I'm rebranding Dharma Coaching Institute as Highest Self Institute.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. And I'm creating a whole array. And eventually I want to actually team up with different spiritual teachers of different lineages and pathways to create different, like, really just like grounded and embodied methods of education, because I feel like our education model really, it's like we're learning about spirituality in this really masculine way of like, we're reading it in the book and the charts and the graphics and this. And I'm like, how can we change? Because so many people are like, I want to dive into these things that you're talking about in a deeper way, but where do I study? Where do I go? And I don't really know where to refer them to. You know, obviously I have my own. So now with Highest Self Institute, I want to be able to take different beautiful spiritual teachers and have it all really one family that you can trust. It's just like on the podcast, I bring on people that I have worked with personally. Like every single person on the podcast has impacted my life in some type of way. No one is random. And that's why they're not the most famous of people. They're people that I personally know. And I want to do the same of like people who are just really in integrity and walking their talk and education in a way that's practice oriented, where it's not learning and memorization, but rather it's the action and the doing and the feedback that you get from it. So the embodiment coaching certification is now the second one. So you can become a certified embodiment coach, which is using the Triple E method to allow people to really receive their own wisdom and their own answers and feel what's underneath the surface and then embody the energy that they're expressing. And down the line, I want to create other ones on sensuality. That's just a huge part of my dharma because it's where all of the wounding in my lineage comes from. And who knows, you know, whatever I'm struggling with one day will be here. So I'll let you know first. But I feel that, you know, when you're able to see that of like, it's all happening for me to transmute and share with others, it's like, it allows me to welcome in those obstacles with such more open arms. So I'm excited to see where it's all heading and like doing it in a way that's joyful and fun and uplifting, because that's why we're here. We also don't need to take this shit all so seriously. You know, we're here to have fun. And sometimes the most sacred thing that you can do is play some Lil Jon and shake your ass on a yacht. I'm just saying.
Oh, I love that so much. I'm just envisioning all of these things, just holding that vision for you. I know it's going to be epic as always and beautiful and just have your own twist on it and your own specific frequency and vibe to it. So I'm super excited. I'm honored as always to just be here with you and to be able to interview you and ask all of these questions and for you to be on the other side of the seats. And, you know, hopefully it felt good for you to like be on that side and answer some questions, but I've enjoyed this. I really have. This has been awesome.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, it's so great because I would have probably never talked about all of these things like on my own because they're very vulnerable topics. And it's funny because these are the conversations I'm having in my real life of people who know me. But then I feel like sometimes when you share things publicly on a podcast, you kind of like maybe wait until you're like few years away from that thing and you speak about it. But this has actually really stretched me into really speaking about more what I'm like personally in right now. And I do feel like these timelines are kind of collapsing of like the old paradigm of like the expert is the person who went through that thing a really long time ago and now they're totally on the other side, zero residue, into now like showing up as just like more vulnerable, messy humans of like, hey, here's what I'm struggling with right now and I don't have all the answers, but this is what I'm learning. Because it's actually when you're learning the thing, you're the most excited about it because you're like in the weeds of it. So I feel like it actually is an exciting time to share it. So I thank you for asking me these questions because it allowed me to open up in this new way.
Yes. I love it. Well, you heard it here first. We're going to have a village.
Yes, we're having a village. It's going to be so much fun. Everyone's invited as long as you're fun.
As long as you're fun.
Yes, I can't wait. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode. If you loved it, please share it. And also share with me on the iTunes store what other questions you would have, what topics. If you would love to be interviewing me on this podcast, if you want me to do another episode like this, if it was helpful for you, please leave a review and share that all in the iTunes store. And as a free gift, I will send you my womb meditation. So this is a meditation that connects you into your sacred womb space so you can receive her answers. So leave a review, take a screenshot, and email it over to me at Sahara@IamSaharaRose.com. You can find that in the show notes. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you in the next one.